Hey there, everyone. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by the YoPro. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of the YoPro, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to attract and retain the best talent, starting with the young professionals you work with. There are a lot of young professional fish in the sea, as I like to say, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. Today, we're starting out our first few episodes of Season 4 with a message from the founder, me. And we're going to start discussing a few trends that are pertinent in today's workplace. So Q1 2024, how you can adapt as leaders, and then some solid action steps. So it's going to be a really jam-packed episode, but we are doing something a little different without a guest. So I hope you all enjoy. We're also in the middle of our 2024 report currently and our survey questions. And so I'm giving you a sneak peek of this. This audience is in for a treat because some of the responses we've been getting from this survey, which is looking at collecting data from 10,000 young professionals, future and current, across the country, and some of the responses might surprise you. So we're going to dive into that a little bit today. So first, before we really dive into the meat of our conversation and our episode, let's do a little recap. Why does YoPro exist? By now, most of you who are listening in our audience probably already know why we're here, but if you don't, the YoPro is a consulting firm that helps companies develop strategies to better attract, develop, understand, and retain top young professional talent. How do we do that? Through our research. So we interviewed thousands of young professionals since 2018, all so that we can create these customized strategies for companies. We do that through our consulting work and through our speaking and workshops, which you can learn more about by heading over to our website on the collective pages. We realized, a lot of people ask, why did I start this? I told you about what we do today, but back in 2018, I was in my corporate insurance career. I was working for a Fortune 500 insurance company, 10,000 employees. I realized a gap in my own career, and I realized, a lot of my peers are job hopping. A lot of my peers just don't seem happy in their careers, not to mention my own experience in feeling that way. And so from there, that led me down this really incredible journey. And so 6 years later, which is really hard for me to believe and say, I was able to take YoPro full time in 2022. This has been a really wonderful journey. And so I'm thrilled that I can share that with you on this podcast and on many stages across the country. So that's just a little bit of context. So why is this important? Why are we doing this? Yes, I started this because of a gap in my own career, but through interviews with thousands of young professionals, I started to find there's this overlapping theme and message that other generations were not picking up on and not understanding. Post-pandemic, in this post-pandemic world, we've started to see even more of a gap between the younger generations and experienced generations in the workforce. And so that is what we're going to talk about today, are some of these really important trends that are happening right now. Now, keep in mind, if you listen to this episode in 2025 or 2026, some of these trends will be no more, and we're going to be on to the next one. But that is why it's so pertinent to stay on top of this and to really get to the root of why generations do what they do, their motivators, their drivers. Yes, we focus on young professionals, but we're also looking at how can we better communicate with all generations in the workforce. Okay, so keep that in mind as we dive into our conversation today. Now, some trends that we are seeing here at the YoPro with our clients and among young professionals in that survey that I mentioned we're collecting right now. Here's what we're going to talk about. So I'm going to give you the high level, and then we're going to dive into each of these topics today. The first is intergenerational communication is on the rise. All right, what do I mean by that? This is our number one speaking request for a reason. People want to understand not just how they can communicate with young talent, they want to understand how can young talent interact with them. We're going to talk about that. Number two, compensation. Everybody wants to know what does compensation have to do in the attracting talent pipeline? Does it matter? Does it not matter? The media shows a lot that young professionals don't care about money as much as previous generations. I'm here today to tell you and give you a little bit more insight as to why this might not be as true as you think. We're going to talk about benefits and wellness and really the surge of work-life balance and wellness-focused organizations. Again, some of the data that we've collected so far might surprise you. The pros and cons of a digital age. There are some recent trends that have been happening on TikTok and Instagram that we're going to dive into and what it means for brands and how you can monitor your social media channels, which is just really important in this day and age when half of your workforce are digital natives. We're going to talk about similarities between generations as well as some differences, but also what I alluded to earlier, there might be some surprises here. And then we're going to talk about future young professional trends. So these are our high school and college students. We're going to talk about what we've been learning about these generations or about this future generation and how your company can prepare. So we've got a lot to touch on. I'm going to try to do it in a really confined way and short period of time, but we're going to give you a call to action after each section, combined with both free and paid resources that we have on our website. So feel free to check those out because I don't want you all to not have a takeaway from this episode. So getting to topic number 1, which is intergenerational communication is on the rise and trending. So again, this is our number 1 requested speaking engagement for a reason. People want to know how to communicate across all generations. Again, we are experts in the young professional space, but we've also spent that same amount of time talking to senior leaders and experienced leaders across all industries, really trying to understand what motivates them, what are they looking for in young professional talent, and how can we meet in the middle. That's really important. What I have found in my speaking journey, and by now I've been speaking for just about 2 years, what I've found is there are a lot of Gen Z and millennial speakers. People are all over this topic, right? But they're often talking about the challenges, they're talking about the differences, and they're talking about what's wrong with these generations. They're not always talking about a solution. So that's where we kind of are different. And that's why we're really trying to help and give practical tips for all generations and how they can communicate best with other generations outside of their own. The reality is that we all grew up with different communication channels, okay? So we know that baby boomers, most of them enjoy face-to-face communication, while younger generations prefer texting or email, internal channels, which we'll talk about. Communication can become disconnected when expectations are not set. We interview young professionals to this day, and in a lot of those one-on-one conversations, young professionals will tell us they've left a job before because expectations were not clear, no matter how many times they asked a question, right? So expectations really need to be set from the very beginning stages during the recruiting period, during the onboarding period. You really cannot go wrong with setting the clearest expectations because that is when your communication can start to suffer. And if it starts on the front end, there is a very big chance that they will not be there in a year or 2 years or more. We talk to a lot of young professionals about what they're looking for, right? What are they looking for to have a fulfilled career? And we've had some insight from our latest data, which includes Slack and internal channels as the preferred method of communication for young professionals. Now, this has changed slightly from the research we collected 2 years ago. We are finding that those young professionals, while they actually don't really like texting as much as they once said to their employers, right, to people in their teams, they really like that internal, quick communication. More of them are liking in-person communication than you would think. We'll talk more about that when we get to the future young professionals section of our conversation today. And so I just want to mention that young professionals really, really prefer this one method where experienced professionals prefer the other. So a lot of what our workshops and trainings consist of are looking at, if you're an experienced professional, how can you become more acquainted with the style of communication that young professionals like? And if you're a young professional, how can you become more acquainted and a little more prepared with the style of communication that experienced professionals like? So as a well-rounded professional, no matter what your age, no matter what generation you're from, it's in our best interest as professionals to just be well-rounded in all forms of communication. That is the takeaway. But in our workshops, we really give you some tools to do that. So a really great action step for you is to view our case study, which is live on our website right now. We show how we've interacted with several clients, many of whom have come in and done one of our workshops. Gives you some really great results that you can just see for yourself and see maybe if that's a great opportunity for you. So intergenerational communication is on the rise. It's trending. I will be shocked if by this time next year, more companies are not having speakers come in and talking about this topic and are not making applications in their day-to-day. So keep that in mind. Next, topic number 2 of the day, we're going to be talking about compensation, okay? And maybe some surprises with this. In our past research, we actually found that compensation did not matter as much to millennials and Gen Z, okay? I'll repeat that. It did not matter as much. I spoke to a group of 600 high schoolers last year and asked them, how many of you would take a pay cut if it meant that you could have increased flexibility and a much better, meaningful, impactful job, right? Guess how many people raised their hands? About 2/3 of the audience, okay? That's a lot of people who would be willing to take that pay cut, right? Meaningful work is very high up on their list. Well, some of the data that we've collected might surprise you in that compensation is a very big motivator and driving factor when it comes to looking for work, right? Now, the key here is that it does not always mean that it works equally as a retention tool, okay? I'll repeat that again. It does not mean that it's a good retention tool. So you can get somebody in the door, but if you are not doing a good job to engage that talent and do all of the other areas that we talk about and that are listed and present on our website, that we talk about on this show, if you're not checking those boxes as well, then the compensation does not matter. So that's a really key factor. It matters in the attracting and recruiting period. It's a little harder to track when you talk about retention because there's so much more that matters, and we're seeing the meaningful work is playing out more in the retention side. Another thing to talk about and why this is maybe surprising is that 2 years ago, this was very post-pandemic. People had a very different perspective on the workforce and what they were looking for in a job. So this was around 2022 when we collected this data. So we think the pandemic certainly impacts these responses from young professionals. We also have found that inflation definitely impacts the responses of young professionals who say that compensation matters to them. And so compensation matters, but so does meaningful work, right? Meaningful work is number 2 for most young professionals so far that we've received that say it's one of the most important factors to them when they are looking for work. So you can get somebody in the door with compensation, as I mentioned, but how you engage them matters even more. So just keep that in mind. But I think compensation, so often I hear questions from senior leaders who are like, why do young professionals not care about money? It's like they do care about money, but they also care about having meaningful work. They care about feeling fulfilled. They care about flex time. They care about a lot of other parts of the workforce because the workforce has evolved. You all know this. Everybody listening and watching knows this. So recognizing that compensation is not the only thing. And it's something, when we're talking about other generations, financial security is a huge motivator for baby boomers, right, in their generation. That is not as much of a top quality for young professionals. So we have to look at it from the motivator side, and that can help you make a lot of smart decisions when you're attracting and retaining young professional talent. So a good next step for you, if you want to explore this topic more, we have plenty of blogs and free resources on our website. We also would love to come in and lead a workshop for you on this topic. So we dive into the data and we share how do you leverage this data to make smarter decisions when you're attracting and retaining talent. So keep that in the back of your mind. All right, next up, we're going to talk about benefits and wellness. So this has been a trend that we've been seeing for a while now, right? Work-life balance meets life over work mentality, which we've talked a lot about on this show before. But more specifically, in our recent findings, we were really intentional about collecting data on benefits and the type of benefits and wellness resources and initiatives that companies are offering. And I'm here to tell you that this is a really important piece of the young professional journey and something that you will, as organizations, need to keep in mind for the next generation of talent, the future Gen Zers that are going to be in the workplace. So those are our current high school and college students now. This matters a lot. And so I'm just going to give you a high-level overview of what we have found so far, which is, number one, wellness matters to young professionals, specifically some wellness initiatives that they would like to see more of in their future workplaces are gym memberships paid by work or a gym membership discount. This was hands down the top response. So pretty fascinating. Sick days, a lot of companies don't offer the young professionals that we surveyed across the country, or if they do, they feel judged for taking sick days. Number 3, healthy snacks at the office. Mental health support, there's a whole other section that we'll talk about in a moment. HSA support, so that's a benefit. And then mental health resources they would like to see more of. Company-wide mental health days, wellness app memberships, information or consultation to help with stress, emotional health, relationships, home life, financial and legal assistance, and career support. And then confidential on-site counselors and coaches for mental health support and therapy. If you're a leader thinking, why should they have this? We did not have this, and we turned out fine. I'm here to tell you that you can leverage any of the data that we share with you from YoPro Know to your benefit or not. You do not have to take this into account, but what I am here to share is that this is something that will engage talent. It'll make them feel supported, and it'll make them feel valued. The fact that information or consultation to help with stress and burnout is a response that was responded by thousands of young professionals at this point, and that was one of their top answers for a wellness and mental health initiative, shows that your talent is burned out, right? We hear all the time about a 4-day work week. And what does that look like? Will that help burnout? Will that hurt it? I'm not telling you need to set up a 4-day work week, although that was a response for some people in this survey. But what I am saying is listen to your talent, whether they're young professionals or experienced professionals. Does not matter what age they are. How can you support your workforce? Because the reality is, with the rise of technology and the rapid changes that we've seen even since the pandemic in just the last 4 years, our workforce has changed dramatically, where everybody, and this was before the pandemic, everybody has access to their emails outside of work hours. They are working way more than the normal 9 to 5. So burnout naturally is going to be increased. So because of that, because of all of these changes, I believe that it is the responsibility of most organizations to offer this kind of support. It is not only a good recruiting tool, but it's a great retention tool. So keep that in mind. Flexibility and PTO were also brought up many times in our research this year. And it's really just a part of a general work-life balance approach, which is extremely important to this next generation of leaders. They're used to this new norm now, and so they are expecting it at other companies. And again, it's such a top factor for them. This contributes to an all-around better culture. And so I want companies and leaders to acknowledge this fact and acknowledge this data, and then choose to leverage it to make the most sense for your company. So if you want to send this to somebody who is in HR, great. A leader who can really start to implement these practices, that would be a great next step for you. One other resource that I would recommend is checking out our website, looking at our services, and seeing the roadmap that we offer. We go through and do an entire assessment of recruiting and retention practices. We also have a lot of great partners that we would recommend you to if you're looking at kind of amplifying and elevating your wellness and benefit practices. And we're going to talk a little bit more about some other benefits in the later section that I think you guys will find really interesting. All right, so next up, we're talking about the pros and cons of a digital age. So in a world where new terms like quiet quitting, quiet firing, quiet promotions, etc., are coined on TikTok, and YoPros are posting videos of them getting fired, caught on camera, anything can happen out there on the World Wide Web, right? How many of you have seen lately, there's been several young professionals who have actually filmed themselves getting laid off virtually, and then they've posted it and it's gone viral, right? The virality of the workplace and things that are historically not put on camera and out there for everybody to see, those days are long gone. And so this is certainly a con of social media and the digital age, right? And there's many pros, but what I want to mention here is that because this is trending right now in 2024, what can you do as a company to make sure that your brand stays in a good place? Because certainly this is not good for any of those companies that are highlighted in that negative light. It's not great from a recruiting standpoint. It's definitely not great from a retention standpoint. So what can you do to make sure that you're safe from this? Let's first talk about the pros. One is that attracting and retaining talent via social media and digital marketing is key. If you've listened to this podcast before, you know that social media is where young professionals are. It's where you can develop a brand. It's where you can actually attract talent because people might find you if they had never known about you before. You can retain talent through digital recognition, which really pays off, and it does not take a ton of effort to do. But building your brand on social media is a really great way of reaching young professional talent. It also enhances your brand, right? In this day and age, brand is everything. I've heard and seen a lot of a lot of articles recently about brands are dying, right? It's the influencers or the individuals that really matter most right now. And I disagree. I think that to some extent, those and people in the room might have different perspectives because the recording studio here is a media company. But I really believe that brands are they're here to stay, right? But it's the changes of your brand and how you show off your brand in the digital world. It needs to be less salesy and it needs to be more culture focused because that's what the next generation is looking for. And these are your future buyers, your future clients, your future talent. So you have to think about it like that. Some cons of having the digital world right at your fingertips. Anyone can share their experience of your brand, what it's like to work there. Think Glassdoor, think just posting on social media. Again, thinking of memes. Some bad company decisions can be turned into memes, and you don't want to be on the other end of that. Posting about firing, like we talked about, be mindful of what you do and say, right? Particularly in the HR space and the marketing space. One wrong move can really, in this world of, cancel culture, if we're going to call it that, one wrong move can put your brand in a bad position. Now, we work with a lot of small to mid-sized companies where their audiences are not in the millions, right? So they might not be experiencing this, but larger corporations that we speak to and that we sometimes consult with, we have to encourage them to be really careful. But those small and mid-sized companies, you still need to pay attention. If you're firing somebody in a distasteful way or there's an HR decision that's made and it's poor communication, that can all get back to you in a negative way. So just be mindful, have a plan, and then also have a plan if something does go wrong, right? In the world of the digital era, if something goes wrong, do you have a crisis communication and plan? These are things that are going to make you more proactive as a company and as a leader, and it can just kind of save you in the long run. So we do have a free masterclass on attracting and retaining top young professional talent that I would recommend you take a look at on our website. It's under our resources page. Again, it's free. This is a really great insight into the pros and cons of the digital era, and I would just encourage you to take a look at that. Next, we're going to talk about the similarities between generations and maybe some surprises for you all. Starting with, these generations might not be so different after all right? We know that from our research, something that might surprise you all is there are some very clear differences that are starting to emerge between millennials and Gen Z. Historically, when I started YoPro back in 2018, millennials made up majority of the young professional workforce, but Gen Zers were starting to kind of creep up. They were in their very, very early 20s when I started YoPro. Now they're into their late 20s, and there's a lot more of them. And so there's this pretty big divide where there's about 10 years of, or eight-ish years of Gen Z and about 11 and 12 years on the other side of millennials that make up that 21 to 39 range. And we're starting to see that these two generations actually they view each other as we've somehow seen baby boomers and millennials view each other. That's very interesting, and that's going to impact how we strategize and speak to our audiences in the future. It's also really important for companies to understand that as well. We've also found that millennials and baby boomers have a few more similarities than you would think. Starting with benefits. So an overwhelming response for our 2024 survey that we have found is that 401ks and HSA matches and some of the more old school benefits. And I say that because when you think of baby boomers, you think of Gen X, you think of standard health insurance, standard 401k, standard benefits. But we're seeing that millennials and Gen Z are actually looking for that as well, which I think is pretty contrary to some other beliefs that they've had. I often hear, young professionals, they just want pet insurance. Like, they don't even care about health insurance. They do. I mean, don't get me wrong. They want the pet insurance too because they love their dogs and their animals. But that was something that I think was really surprising. And I believe you all will think that's surprising as well. And we're seeing an emerging trend in person, okay? That's something that is very different, again, about our research from 2 years ago when most young professionals said, we don't want to be in person. We want the hybrid. We want virtual. We want Zoom conversations. We would much rather do that than be in person. We're starting to see with both millennials and Gen Z, and then also future young professionals, we're starting to see that in person is actually starting to be on the rise again. And that is going to make the pendulum swing back in the direction that it once was pre-pandemic. So not that much time has passed, but it feels like a lifetime at this point for some of us, pre-COVID and post-COVID, PC and PC. And we're just starting to see that there might not be as many differences as we thought. So the key is, and why the work that we do at YoPro is so critical, is finding those differences, not making a big deal of them, but coming up with solutions. And part of that is motivators are different. Motivators are the key differences in most of these generations. And so while some of their interests, right, in benefits, in communication styles, some of those might be similar. But at the end of the day, a lot of their drivers, whether it's recognition types, whether it is mental health resources, whether it's flexibility, those are the areas that leaders need to be focused on. And that's how you're going to win attracting and retaining top young professional talent. So again, we talk about a lot of this in our workshop. So we do have a free intergenerational communication workshop that's going to be available soon on our website. This is a great way to see a little taste of what we've talked about today. And then you can also have us come in and do a speaking engagement or workshop on intergenerational communication and really bridging that gap, talking about the data, talking about how you can leverage it. And most importantly, something that's really important to me is making sure that we give you practical tips that you can start to apply tomorrow, right? And acknowledge that data changes and things change, solutions change. So you have to be nimble in this day and age in this workforce. And then last but not least, talking about future young professional trends. So what are we seeing with high school and college students? Because that is a huge push for us. We've actually never collected data on students before. And last year we realized after a few speaking engagements with these generations, this generation, of course, which is Gen Z, and soon to be Gen Alpha, which is crazy to say, we realized that it's really equally important for us to be in that space because we want to help the companies that we work with prepare for the next generation. So here's what we found so far. We know that company culture matters most when this next generation is looking for places to work. They also are really seriously looking at compensation. Again, very similarly to what we talked about earlier today on the episode. What is least important to them, and this one's going to hurt some people's feelings, so I'm sorry, it's actually career fairs. I've been saying this for a while. Career fairs work for some industries, but most of them, it is outdated to a lot of young professionals. Why? Because they can find you on social media. They can find you on your website. They have other places to look. There are some future young talent that want to be in person, and so they will go. But we're going to start to see a social impact from the pandemic with this generation that was hit hardest in their very formative years of communicating with their peers. If they have the chance to not go, they're not going to go. And so that's something that we're going to dive a lot more into later this year in our content, in our presentations. Young professionals, future talent wants to see more options for internships. I think this is a really interesting perspective. They sometimes feel like they're getting ghosted by employers. They are not seeing as many opportunities. Like some of their friends will get one, but then they might apply to like 20 and they're still not getting a response. How can your organization change this? Because internships are a fantastic pipeline to attracting talent and retaining talent if done well. So really consider that. Is your company not offering enough internships? Or can you offer an internship? Advertise your culture on social media. This is something that a lot of future talent told us they look for. They said that companies could do more of this, right? That's what we do at YoPro, is try to help companies develop these strategies, not selling your service on social, but selling your culture for future talent. They want to know what's expected of them. We've talked about expectations already today, but again, these are verbatim words that young talent is telling us and those students are telling us. They believe remote work opportunities will not hinder their opportunity for growth. This might be the most surprising. We asked future and current young professionals this question, and it's really pretty split. So most people feel that remote work or hybrid work is not going to hinder them from future growth opportunities, so promotions. That's surprising, right? That's a very different perspective. When I ask senior leaders what they think about this, they're like, oh, we're never going to promote somebody like that. So that's a direct tension. That's a direct barrier. That's important to recognize. And I don't have a solution that we can talk about today, but that's certainly something that we talk about in future content and also in our workshops and our trainings. What motivates high schoolers and college students? And I'll wrap up the meat of the conversation with these 5 traits, because it's important to recognize what these motivators are, as I mentioned, and how you can leverage those and really harness those for future potential and future drivers and work ethic of this next generation. They are growth opportunities. That's number 1, meaningful work, compensation, recognition, and career advancement. Okay? I want everybody to remember that, because there might be some overlap with previous generations, but this is the future. So what can you do now to prepare your workforce, your landscape, to attract and retain this top talent? Because again, the whole reason that YoPro is in existence is because we're here to help you develop strategies that, can help your business. That's important. We care about that. But we are making a bigger impact and a bigger imprint on the workforce as a whole. Okay, we know that we have an aging population that is experienced professionals. We have a surge of young professionals. How are we going to train and develop them to be the next generation of leaders that we need? Okay, so all of this, again, why we're talking about these trends, why we're talking about some really impactful data today, is so that you can make decisions to leverage this as leaders. You have that option, okay? No one's forcing you to do it, but I hope that you've taken just a little bit away today that you can start applying or start diving into a little bit more. So we have provided you with several opportunities today to take advantage of this data and our trends. To learn more, as I've mentioned, visit our website to see how you can start applying some of these tools and resources today. Again, our goal is to make this really simple for you. We want you to take a look, play around with some of the resources we have, and see if there's room for more, if that's something that interests you, or just reach out, have a free discovery call. I'm happy to share maybe a good direction for you to start. So thank you guys so much for listening. This, again, I just always like to respond to the fact that we're here. This really started as a passion of mine, and to see 6 years later how it's expanded, how it's grown, how we're speaking across the country and working with dozens of companies across the region and soon to be across the country, it's truly a dream come true. I couldn't do it without my team. We've got 8 people, which is wild to say. Everybody that allows me to be right here and sharing this information, sharing this data is why I'm able to do what I do. And so YoPro team, thanks for all you do. Clients and partners, thanks for everything you do to support YoPro. We've got a lot of exciting things coming up. And so I hope that you will hit follow or subscribe and stay tuned to see what else we have coming this year. So with that, thanks so much for listening to The Great Retention with Camber Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the workforce today and are expected to jump at a rapid pace in this next decade. What will you do to help them become the great leaders we need for our future? Join us next time for more information on how to recruit and retain top young professional talent. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcast or wherever you listen to your podcast. If you're interested in learning more about how you can get working with our team, feel free to email me. That is camber@yoprono.com. Or use the Contact Us page on our website. Let us know what you think would help your team right now, and we'd love to talk to you. Thanks again. We'll see you next time.